Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Cindy Collado, and I'm here with my colleague and great friend, Dr. Jacqueline Urbani. And we are going to let you read the title of our presentation just to make sure it's accessible to everyone. You can see here that we have a QR code to a folder. If you would like to follow along in the presentation, the PowerPoint is in there. This is also based on an article we wrote together last year with a ton of resources for everybody. And there's also in there a handout if you'd like to download it and type into it while you reflect throughout our presentation. To get started, we like to start this presentation, since it's about equity, just to share our identities, because it's important as we're talking about critical consciousness. Both Jackie and I identify as white, cisgendered females who are able-bodied, and we make sure that this is an important piece of that, because it's really helpful to know where we're coming from, what our identities are as we work towards equity. Jackie, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jaci Urbani. I am a professor of early childhood special education at Mills College at Northeastern University in Oakland. Critical consciousness is using critical thinking to examine those internal prejudices that we were just talking about. It's a concept to identify your inner beliefs by assessing the words and the actions that you use and the circumstances where we use them. So what is happening in our classrooms and our interactions with students. And then we want to look at how oppressive actions and systems sustain or perpetuate inequities. So we want to look at, there are systemic issues here, but we need to look at our own individual internal biases and how that may influence our practice. So if you can add, I think we should just do this in the chat, Cindy, is your concept of critical consciousness. What might be a word or a phrase that you would use to describe critical consciousness? Coaching children's families, a lens, awareness. Oh, and I love it that people are on the poll everywhere too. So thank you for participating in whatever way works best for you. Mindfulness, intentionality, realization, being aware. Yes. So all of the above, I love it. So as we're looking at this, one of the hard things about this is we have come into this profession because we are good people and we want to do good things for children. And it's very hard when you start to use critical consciousness on yourself and to see where we have flaws and how they might play out in classrooms and with parents and with our students. So I'd like to right now read you a poem that one of my college students wrote, looking at how teachers may have shown ableism in the classroom. And Kathleen, I will read this and try and do it slowly, so you're not rushing through. So this poem is called "Who Has a Learning Disorder?" And it is written by Jerome Tatum. My teacher said, "Poor kid, I know why you can't read. It's because you have a learning disability. These things are permanent, you see, so you will never be able to read like me. It would be a waste of time and effort to try and see if maybe you could learn in a different way than me. It might seem unfair, but it's my responsibility to make sure that we lower our expectations of what you can be. Thank God, Oh, you should be glad that you have an IEP. Thank God for SPED. After processing what I heard, I said, look, Teach, I don't believe I have a learning disability. That's a general diagnosis for a wide group of peeps. So much so that we really don't know what you mean. And why, when white kids struggle, their cognitive ability compared to me isn't under the same kind of scrutiny. They still go to class and earn their degree, while I'm stuck in the same class all day with the same teach. Have we considered racism, sexism, or poverty? Maybe one of these is the reason I can't read. So what we'd like to do is hear your thoughts about that. We're trying to get you involved as much as we can in this presentation. So what were you thinking and feeling when I was reading that poem, or when you read the poem? Honest, true. Powerful. Yeah. So what we'd like to do is ask you to rate your confidence in developing your own critical consciousness. Cringing at the beginning, yeah. Upset of the teacher's response. Unfortunately, all too true. Anger that a teacher would think that way. Good for this kiddo. Yes, isn't that great? Now this kiddo, of course, was a college student, an adult. So I don't know if young kids have the ability to stand up and discuss something like that with a teacher. But if we could now have you think about how comfortable are you right now with examining your own critical consciousness? Not at all. This is something you're just starting. You're taking baby steps. You're beginning to feel a little comfortable. You're working on it, or you feel really great about it. You're totally confident and rocking it. Working on it. That makes me so happy that so many of us are working on it. I love that response. And I'm sorry, my phone's ringing. Okay, so now what we're doing in this session is we're the outcomes of this session that we want for you all, and that we hope to accomplish is Cindy, if you could go to the next slide. I love that we're at 100% there. Is we want to together collectively look at our critical consciousness and how can we increase our comfort level and vulnerability with engaging in this work, because it is not comfortable. And then two, we also want to help you create a plan for activities that you can engage in to address bias within your own programs. And we actually have that if you have used the QR code, you can access our materials. And I just put a link in the chat for a handout that will introduce you, as we go through this presentation. Sorry, you can kind of follow along and write notes on that if you'd like. Okay, so when we look at inclusive education, starting with the youngest kids, preschool could be the on-ramp to success and inclusion and a stepping stone to a more equitable education. But that doesn't always happen. And so how do we ensure education is successful for everyone? What do we do about that? And we think it begins with looking at ourselves. How are we interacting with our students and our families and ourselves? So our system, unfortunately, is racist and ableist. Black preschool boys are 3 times more likely to be expelled than K-12 students. And students with disabilities are 2.5 times more likely to be expelled than students without disabilities. So students of culture also receive more stigmatizing disability labels that are also subjective. So learning disability, behavioral disorder, and such. So now we'd like to move on to some actual scenarios and what do we do about this? How do we address these issues within ourselves? And I am going to stop talking while Cindy takes over, and I am going to be the interpreter to give Kathleen a break. So I hope I am visible, and Kathleen, thank you very much. I'll take over from here.
Great. All right. Thank you, Jackie. So we want to start off this session with a scenario that perhaps is familiar to some of you. And while we have a focus on preschool, this can extend to across the grades, right? Just imagine if you are an older grade teacher or working with teachers in high school, elementary, you can imagine this could be a similar scenario. So the scenario is you have a student in your class, and the student is from a different racial or cultural background than you. Your team is pulling out all your best strategies for building relationships and interventions to support them, but they're still struggling in your class. And your team can't figure out what you're missing, and it's so frustrating. So keep this scenario in mind as we go through today, this session, because while we talk about how to support students with disabilities, we can never forget this other aspect of it, that our system is racist, and we may have implicit biases that might be influencing our decisions and our interpretation of behaviors. So that brings me to this. We want to make it real. And, critical consciousness is a tough concept. It's about addressing our implicit biases. It's about taking a step back and really thinking about, is there these biases that are sneaking into my perspectives, my observations of students, my understandings of them? And is it more that those are the implicit biases that are driving me? Or is it about my student's disability that I need to address? So I'm going to show you how we work through this, which is through this equity pause. And the equity pause is really important as we create this on-ramp to inclusion, because we have to be intentional, we have to be reflective, and we have to shift to this asset-based approach, meaning we're being more strengths-based. We're focusing on the whole child, we're focusing on who they are, they have behaviors, and they just happen to show up in this way that communicates to us that something's going on. So let me show you what an equity pause looks like. And when we're working through this, the equity pause is really helping us move away from this system, which is we have educators. And often when we work with educators, whether they're pre-service or in-service teachers, we're focusing only on evidence-based practices, and we ignore that equity principles and diversity. And when I say equity, it's really about everyone getting what they need, not everyone getting the same thing. So it's really, and it's focusing on the diversity and celebrating the diversity on a daily basis in our classrooms and our programs with our families, not doing a one-off celebration about the different cultures in our programs. So this is, when we're working with our educators, historically, we've only focused on, these are the best practices, these are interventions that work, these are strategies used to implement. And when we do that and we forget about equity, we're just accepting that the education system is working, it's unbiased, and we need to continue to push forward. And that's a lot of us special education teachers. We've been trained to be interventionists, that we know the right answer, that we're the ones to go to, right? But we forget about this whole piece of diversity and individuals with disabilities and this disability justice kind of aspect. So when this happens, we see that there's separate on-ramps. And these on-ramps to our education system and to our outcomes is really the school to prison nexus right now. So nexus meaning that we are currently in a system where children are being watched, observed, judged, as if it's like they're in prison already. That it's not this school to prison pipeline that we've talked about in the historically, where if they have these behaviors and such, they go down this path towards the prison. But what we see right now is that our students who are typically Black boys, especially, but our Black boys with disabilities, our Black girls with disabilities, our students who come from different cultures, they are being watched and observed. And because of that, they are often more likely to be identified with disabilities, and those disabilities are often segregated. So we are seeing that they are segregated already in our preschools. There's this readiness model where we're saying you have to be ready for preschool in order to be integrated with your students without disabilities, your peers. And we want to get away from that system. Every kid is ready for inclusion because they are a kid. And that's our perspective, is that if we start to segregate and say they need to have certain skills, then we are going to be creating these separate on-ramps, and they will never get to this on-ramp to inclusion. So what we are proposing is that we need to have educators, if we are going to backwards plan that we want to have inclusive education, then we are going to backwards plan and realize that we should have opportunities for students to develop equitable instructional practices. So when we're working with teachers, when we're working with preparing teachers, we want them to always be thinking about equity and challenging the system as they're building these practices and strategies and teaching skills. This is all about analyzing oppressive policies and practices at the same time. So always challenging that and questioning it and wondering if we are being equitable as teachers. And that creates our pipeline to inclusive education. And that means that if they start in inclusive education, they will continue and they will have better outcomes and higher expectations and greater friendships and a greater quality of life. So if our implicit biases influence the way we teach and treat and teach young children, then we need to proactively address these biases so all children can benefit from our education system. And I'm just giving a pause because I just remember that Jaci's interpreting and Kathleen was before. So I'll make sure that I give pauses so it's better. Okay. So we're going to talk about these. We want to connect. We have in early child the 4 anti-bias goals of early childhood education. And these are similar to the anti-bias or social justice goals for educators and other grades. But we want to ground it in this critical consciousness. So in early childhood ed, we have these 4, these are from Derman Sparks and the work of Edwards as well. And so the first one is identity. When we're talking about with children and us teachers are teaching our children about identity, it's all about celebrating the individual, the beautiful nature of who you are, what makes you special, unique, talking about what your strengths are, even what things you're working on to improve. And when we're talking about our teachers and addressing critical consciousness, now, if they're looking at their identity, they need to really think about, yes, what makes me a wonderful teacher? What are my values? But I need to challenge those values and those perspectives. I need to think about what are my assumptions with regard to what students should be doing, what's important in our education system, and also be challenging ourselves with what privileges am I afforded? What experiences have I had, especially me as a white woman in our education system? I have a lot of privilege that I've experienced throughout my education system. I haven't been watched and observed as other kids have. And so I need to be really aware that I have these experiences that make it hard for me to understand the experiences of others. And that means I have a lot more work to do to really uncover those implicit biases. And that's life work. And that's what we're working on today. It's starting that work. Now, the second goal of anti-bias for children is, now that we understand who we are individually, now let's celebrate the diversity of our classroom. Let's celebrate what makes us similar, but also what makes us different. And then that's beautiful. And that we bring all these great things to our classroom and our community. So that's what we're celebrating in our classrooms. And when we're thinking about our teachers, we're moving beyond just the similarities and differences to developing a level of comfort and joy with people who are different from us. So being aware that our children are different, come from different backgrounds, experiences, and being aware that people with disabilities come from different experiences. And so we are really developing and increasing that comfort and joy with that. And that is all about our experiences, about digging in to work with others, and really celebrating disability advocates. So the third one, justice, is with children and with adults, is really digging into identifying inequities. So really helping children see that there's things that are unfair in our society, leaning into those conversations, talking to them about why something may be fair or not fair. And then with our teachers, it's doing the same thing, like saying, why are a lot of our kids with disabilities who are segregated in separate classrooms, why are often they are our BIPOC students, our Black, Indigenous people of color? Why are they overrepresented in those classrooms? Even asking, why do we have students who are BIPOC students with disabilities? They tend to be identified in disability categories like intellectual disability, emotional behavioral disorders, and those disabilities are typically first and primary placement is a segregated setting. We need to ask why these inequities are happening. And once we are able to like dig into those and have those conversations, the last goal is that we can take action. And that happens with our kiddos, like asking them, what should we do? What should we do to change this? And then with our teachers, what can we do as teachers to change this system that is inequitable? We don't want it to continue. We want to promote inclusion. We want to support our students with disabilities, our BIPOC students with disabilities, everyone. And we need to make change. So we're going to walk you through some examples of activities. Our article has a plethora of more. If you feel like you want to, if you need to dig into any one of these or all of them. So the first one is identity. Jackie, do you want a break? I'm wondering if Kathleen is saying.
Yes, I'm ready. I'm ready to switch now. 15, something like that. I'm ready to take over.
Okay. I will let you do that.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to dig into this first one, which is, let's give you an example of what it looks like to explore your assumptions and privileges. So this is an example of this equity pause when we look at our trainings in our state. So in our state, a lot of our early childhood educators are trained on the teaching pyramid. This is a huge thing across the state. It's the early childhood version of positive behavior intervention supports. So with that, one of the main activities is this hot button. It's an awesome activity, and I want to show you how you can go deeper to create this equity pause with it. So the teaching pyramid, you can see here, this first tier is nurturing and responsive relationships. Now with nurturing responsive relationships, there's a lot of training that we do to make sure teachers are connecting with our students, that you are building those relationships. And when we're looking at our students with disabilities, it's really important to identify how can we connect with them in the ways that make sense for them, that build on their strengths. And so that's what we're looking at with the teaching pyramid. Now we want to add an equity pause to these activities in the teaching pyramid. So that this equity pause is about being intentional and being reflective and supporting that asset-based approach. So in this activity in the teaching pyramid, they talk a lot about why we build relationships with children. And I'll let you just scan these here to see some of the reasons why we build relationships. I think we can all agree that these are valuable and important. And there's three things that we know get in the way, and there's probably plenty more, but three primary things that get in the way of those relationships. We have cultural differences. So being aware that me not knowing about the culture of someone else may make it hard for me to connect with them. Also, that we have varied developmental beliefs. Different families, different cultures have different beliefs about when should we potty train? When should children be able to read? How should we learn? So all those differences change how we make a judgment about someone, how we teach that person. And our opinions are important too. We are individuals with strong opinions, and that is different from people to people. I'll jump down to the third one there, which is stress. And we know that stress is high right now. It's tough being a teacher. And if we come with depleted sleep, with stressors, we're being overworked, there's no subs out there, children are having a hard time, we're experiencing secondary trauma. There's a lot happening, and stress makes it hard to connect with people. The third thing here is the hot buttons. And this is the one I'll show you how we want to put this equity pause into this activity. Is when we're looking at hot buttons, we're looking at what are the things that trigger us? What things give us, make our blood boil, make us turn red? Kids do things, adults do things that make us really angry. And they may make us angry because of a traumatic experience we've had. They make us angry because it's challenging our values. It may make us angry because it brings to light the inequities we think we have, that we don't have the skills to address something. So this is the hot buttons I'm going to walk you through. So I want to have you take a moment and think about this. Is what's one hot button for you? What's a challenging behavior? If you're working with adults, then feel free to do it about your adults that you work with, you coach. If it's about children, then that you work with, or high schoolers, then what's one behavior that is really challenging for you and makes you super angry and hard to connect with that student? If you feel so inclined, you may type it in the chat if you feel comfortable. But I'm going to let you just reflect right here. Is what's write the emotion that best describes the way this behavior makes you feel. Let's focus on us and away from that behavior. These are good. Yes. Interrupting is a hot button. When they say they can't do it. Aggression. Yes. Disrespect. Unkindness. Yep. After the pandemic, a lot of teachers have said spitting is a hot button for me. Good. Okay. So now let's turn it on ourselves. What's the emotion that comes? Is it anger? Is it frustration? Is it fear, anxiety in you? And how do you typically respond to this behavior? And I just want you to think about, how does that impact your relationship with the child and their family? Yeah, a lot of the things people are saying, it's anger, out of control, frustrated. Some people feel embarrassed by these feelings. So what we want to do with our hot buttons is really realize that when children or adults have these challenging behaviors, they're sending us a message. And that message is really important to recognize. We need to recognize our own feelings and then notice that those with those most challenging behaviors especially need secure relationships with others. But because of those behaviors, they're often prevented from benefiting from those relationships. We turn away from those adults, we turn away from those kids, we protect ourselves, and they are the ones that actually need us the most. So when we're looking at the equity pause, it's not showing up on the bottom there, but the equity pause is we need to reflect on how our beliefs about how children should behave are connected to ableism. Meaning, when we think about children need to have, be able to read, children have to be able to sit down and listen. Children have to be able to have, for our children with autism, they have to have joint attention to be able to be included in our classrooms. That is ableism. It's believing that compliance is more important than individuality. And from the disability community, they call it masking. You're forcing me to act like someone I'm not, to this norm of who you think it should be in our system. But I'm not that. And so you're making me have to work extra hard to show you behaviors that you think are important. And we need to be careful about what that's saying. And what's not showing on the bottom of the screen is it's also connected to racism. You know, our beliefs about how you should behave are connected to our value system, our own cultures, but we need to realize that there's other ways of being and acting in our system. So I'll show you how to reframe it. So when I wanted you to think about your own feelings, because it's really about, if you can reframe, you're going to prioritize the relationship with that individual and be able to see through that behavior to see what's important, and also reflect on yourself. So that if you insert your hot button, you're going to then do a reframe statement. So if we have our hot button here, the disrespect or saying I can't do it, I'm going to show you how you reframe it. And it's really important to not just reframe it, but to recognize that the assumptions and triggers in yourself. So that's the equity pause that we need to take it to the next level. When we do that, then we become more of an inclusive framing, this asset-based approach. So let me show you. So if you say they're so destructive, they're manipulative, and that's frustrating you, the equity pause is really, you need to realize that you're saying that there's only one appropriate way to communicate, and compliance or masking their behavior is more important than their individual expression. To reframe it, we can say, I can handle this, I'm in control, and they've just learned powerful ways to get control, and I'll teach them some other appropriate ways to behave. And this is the asset-based approach, that neurodiversity and communication is respected. Our job is to empower students by partnering with them, identify what works to help them and support them. And I'm going to go past this other example because we're running out of time, but there's your reframe statement can be recognized in different ways. And it's important that when we're looking at an equity pause, that we're really realizing that the problem is not within the student. The problem is within our system. It's within our classrooms and our relationships and our instruction. And we need to fix that and not the student. That's what UDL is all about, universal design for learning, right? So we need to move away from they are horrible children to it's great. We're going to learn some new ways to teach and be in our classroom. That's the inclusive framing that's important. So just remember, every child needs one person who's crazy about them. That's about the resiliency that they deserve. And I think Jaci is going to take it from here with identity.
Hello. Thanks, Kathleen, and thanks to the new ASL interpreter. Appreciate that you're here. So as we look at identity, we're really looking at our own biases. And one of the ways that we can do that with ourselves and with pre-service teachers and with our colleagues is to engage with others around learning about others and what are the hidden biases that you might have. So have you all watched the movie Crip Camp? I have my students at Mills College watch that, and one of the students commented, the thing that struck me most about Crip Camp were the scenes that were so humanizing and just raw and honest and real. It feels so wrong that I was struck by the need to humanize disabled folks because they are all human and should not have to face dehumanization in the first place. So with this task and this reflection, I felt like this student was really looking at her own internal biases and how they might play out in her own teaching. So with identity, we want you to reflect on the different assumptions and privileges that you may have. And we ask that different ways you can do that is reading about anti-bias practices, watching films that challenge stereotypes, such as Crip Camp, watching videos and about anti-bias and hidden biases, and increasing your experiences with others who are different from you. So the second goal of the anti-bias goals with education is diversity. And that is, again, as Cindy said, with identity, it's looking at ourselves and what we need to recognize in ourselves and appreciate in other people, including our students. But with diversity, we want to get to a place where we and our students are have a level of comfort and have a level of joy. I love that word, joy, with people who are different than us. So what we recommend, and what is recommended in other research as well, is to really learn about other people from those people. So for example, we do book clubs in my college course. We do literature circles. Those are things that you can do in your own school community. We did jigsaws where we would watch this young man, Dylan Alcott, The Truth About Growing Up Disabled. And so some students would watch one video and others would watch a different video with another presenter, and they'd have very specific questions to think about as they were watching the video and discuss. And then they'd come back and share what they learned about that video. Quite frankly, I feel like there's so much to learn and there's so much information and so many good resources out there. And this is a way to have everyone experience all the resources without actually having to read everything or watch everything. And it helps some people be really part of or be the expert on that one resource. The other thing is intergroup contact. So bring in people who are not in the majority in your school and in your classroom. And one of the books we highly recommend is Being Human, written by Judy Human, who just recently passed away, unfortunately, but she is considered one of the leaders of the disability rights community. So if you can now, okay, here are other ideas for diversity activities. And this table comes from the article that we wrote. Like Cindy said earlier, we have a lot of resources for how do we try and develop critical consciousness through these diverse activities. If you can head to the next one, Cindy. And the article is in the Google Drive that we shared with you via the QR code. So with justice means that we are looking for and identifying what is fair and what is not. And students get students are so much more empathetic than adults, I think. And they have an ability to look at things and critically analyze that, no, that's not fair, and it's not fair for this reason. So one of the things we do is connect the African-American movement, the civil rights movement for equity with the disability rights community and their fight for justice as well. So this is a book written by Melba Patillo-Beals that we recommend. And Melba was a member of the Little Rock Nine, one of 9 Black students who integrated Central High School. And you can see on this picture that she needed armed guards with her throughout the school year. Would you like to hit play so that we can hear what she says and we can think about the intersection of race and ability and justice? And we have the words for the section that we are trying to play. If it's not working, Cindy, I can just read it.
Did you get to be one of them?
Can you hear it?
Originally, there were 116 students. And then it sort of whittled down to 9 by people being frightened and people being threatened, because by this time, the White Citizens Council had nominated a committee of white people to go door to door, contact you through your doctor, contact you through whomever they get to you, tell you, oh, now, you don't want to integrate. But eventually, to qualify, in the beginning, to qualify, you had to have good grades and you had to have a record of not fighting, not talking back, a record of being a good student, behavior-wise and academically.
And you had to volunteer. You stepped up to do this.
Oh, amen.
Cindy. So you can see here how these students were picked for this very, very important historical moment because of their behavior and their academics and what was expected of them. Okay.
I'll also say, Jackie, that,
Mhm.
you know, for justice, it's important for us to make the connection to the intersectionality, that there's intersections between race and disability, and that there's experiences that we had students being segregated back during the civil rights era, and now they're being segregated again. So we don't want to repeat history. So we have our students that, you know, we need to show them that there is a connection here, and we need to be very clear about what that connection is so we can make change.
Thanks, Cindy. From there, Cindy, since we don't have much time, do you want to jump to slide 39 to discuss activism?
So for activism, it's really taking a stance and addressing these inequities. So helping our teachers recognize that there is unfairness, and then now what can we do to take action? So some ideas with teachers is, you know, writing grants. So we have the EAP grant in early childhood, the Inclusion Early Education Expansion Grant. And there's other grants out there to advance inclusion, or asking, you know, getting the support of SIP, SIP. So there's various ways that we can advance inclusion because it's the right thing to do for our students. It's also about making changes as teachers with how we do our individualized education plans. IEPs are a system that is built on eligibility, identification, and placement. And we need to be careful about our decisions that happen in those spaces. And so when we shift away from a long list of deficits to a list of strengths, and where is the student working at? What are they working on now? What's the next steps that help them improve? That kind of language changes how we see that individual child, and it changes how we support them, how we decide if they are quote unquote ready for inclusion. We start to see that this child is a human being, and our decisions change too. It's also about, you know, being on your teams in your school. Maybe there's different teams that you can be a part of, like an MTSS team or others if you have some at your school site, and leading discussions about like LRE data. LRE is least restrictive environment. Really seeing, like, if you look at data, sometimes it helps us bring to light the inequities that are happening. And that data shows us that we don't have a lot of kids included. So we want to wrap up this part with, you can either continue on that text with me on that, or you can type into the chat one way you feel like you can be an activist in your circle of influence. As you're typing that, I see Taylor has a great comment that's, I've heard people say that every intersection actually separates people more. I took this amazing disability rights class in my doctoral program in Chicago with Jim Charlton, who wrote the book, Nothing About Us Without Us. And he argued that, yes, people are segregated or disenfranchised if they have disabilities. But then if they also are a BIPOC individual, they are doubly disenfranchised. And so, yes, I would agree that they are walking all these different ways that they are segregated from society. These are great ideas. Model, speak up. disrupt common practices, educate others. Good. Asset-based approaches. Beautiful. Yes, be the change. Okay, I'm sure we could continue with this on. And I appreciate your ideas and your activism. And what we want just to wrap up with is, now that we've talked about critical consciousness, we've walked you through some activities. What's your definition of critical consciousness so that you can share with your colleagues and community? So just think about, how would you explain that to others? So we created this slide as we thought we'd have, I don't know, 15 people attending. And so, but we have, it looks like up to 58 attendees, which is amazing. So I don't know if anyone wants to, you can type into the chat what your definition of consciousness, critical consciousness is, or if anyone wants to unmute and share, we'd be happy to hear. And Carol's getting a yes, Carol, shake off the biases, open your mind and take action. I love it. Monica says, oh, go ahead. Who's unmuting?
Oh, it was me. I was
Oh,
going to say
Jaci.
what Laurie just said, or put in the chat, that examining existing practices and beliefs so I can be more intentional about changing them. And that's an excellent definition. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and Jasmine says active process of examining personal biases and moving forward, evolving. Yes, it's a lifelong process. Thank you. We wanted you to think about that because we threw a big word at you. We wanted you to be able to walk away being able to explain, like, oh, what session did you go to? And they'll be like, well, what is critical consciousness? We want you to be able to say what it is. So these are just wrapping up, is that, we have responsibilities. We are all teacher leaders, and we serve as models. So all these things, that redefining critical consciousness, thinking about how can we be activists, we are serving as models. And this is from our article. There's more information in there, but it's just really about modeling an asset-based approach, modeling how we challenge inequities, modeling how we really think about our education system as not perfect. And the next is, we have to facilitate difficult conversations with young children, with leaders, with administrators, with teachers. We can't walk away from these moments that happen, and we need to be ready to do that. And how uncomfortable we may feel, or how we might stumble over our words, it needs to happen. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And the last is, it's lifelong. We've said it throughout, is that we need to see this as a lifelong process, and continue to reflect and change the way that we behave, because this is a system that doesn't work for everyone, and we need it to. Okay, so if you want to rate your confidence now, I don't think it refreshed. I wonder if I can refresh it, or type into the chat. Are you feeling better, or is it still a 4 or D? Good. Oh, we've got an E. I don't know if Dora, you changed, but she's all the way up to E. This is great. Yvette says E as well. Nicole's at DE. Beautiful. We want to be clear that this is something we can all do. It's not a scary thing. It's not out of our reach. So we're going to wrap up. This is the article that we wrote last year. If you'd like more ideas about how you can engage in your own circles in any one of those 4 categories of anti-bias goals, go to our article. It's in the folder that we shared with you. And let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to connect and communicate and do whatever we need to make change. Thank you for attending our session.
Wow, that was heavy, but for me, it was inspirational. Thank you, Dr. Urbani and Dr. Collado, and thank you everyone in attendance for your allyship to our students with disabilities and their families. It's our mission to grow our educational system, to innovate, include, and impact outcomes positively for all, from birth to adulthood and beyond. All of this presentation slides and resources can be accessed in this session description section on the VFAIR's agenda page. Next on the agenda is lunch, so make sure to refuel, refresh, and network with other inclusion allies and accomplices in the social lounge. There is also an optional roundtable discussion with several topics if you wish to participate. And I know Dr. Urbani is going to lead a roundtable discussion, so make sure you also go there. And don't forget to connect in the social lounge with like-minded attendees and post on social media using the hashtag Con 2023. Enjoy your lunch, everyone.